Hello, welcome to AI Fund's Launcher Series. I'm Kimberly Rose, VP of Marketing for the fund. Every episode, I'll be talking with an industry influencer who will be giving advice on building companies and lessons learned for the founder community. Today, Chris Brenchley and I will be chatting about customer development and how to find those pain points. Chris is the co-founder and CEO of Surehand, a venture-funded startup focused on reducing labor shortages and underemployment in the skilled industrial trades. A survivor of the corporate world and serial entrepreneur, Chris brings over 25 years experience in rapid commercialization of B2B SaaS offerings to our conversation. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Kim. Always great to be with you.
Nice to see you. How are you doing today?
Hanging in there, coming to you from my home office here in lovely San Jose, as you are. Just working through these interesting times.
They are interesting indeed. So I'm glad to have you here. And I have a lot of questions for you, but I figure we'll kind of start talking about your views on customer development, your experiences, and what you can offer the community.
Yeah, look, I think as you and I discussed prior to the call, I think customer development and doing it properly is absolutely essential for startups, new initiatives, and it really doesn't matter if you're working for a large organization, big corporation, which I've done. I've survived that experience, and I've launched dozens of products and business lines for companies, all digital. And honestly, I didn't always do customer development correctly. And as I made the shift in the last 10 years to the entrepreneurial world, I've learned a lot about how to do it well. Again, I've certainly made my share of mistakes along the way. So I'm looking forward to sharing those insights with your audience today.
So there's so many different types of build models, from agile to lean startup to design thinking, and everybody has their own little twist on how to do customer development work. I know you've gone through a variety of those as well. I'd love to hear from your past mistakes in building companies. What do you suggest not to do, and what do you suggest to do in starting that journey?
I think probably the biggest mistake that as a founder or CEO that sort of we tend to make is we have this great idea, and we might even have a fully formed sort of offering, product experience or something in mind. And whether you want to build a quick and dirty MVP, or you want to do some rapid prototyping, I think the risk or the tendency is to do those things and then take them out to your stakeholders, right? Either your end users, your buyers or customers. In the case of B2C plays, the user and the economic buyer are typically the same person. In the B2B world, obviously that can be different, where your stakeholders are, the buyer, the company that buyer works for, and in fact, the actual end users of the solution. So I think probably the biggest mistake in my experience is not taking the time up front to do proper customer development, get out of the building. I don't know if you're familiar with GOOB as an acronym. You've probably heard me say it before. I love it. And whether you're actually physically meeting with those people in person, it's very hard to do in the current climate, or leveraging technology to do that, having those conversations and leveraging a really good customer development framework, and as you suggest, there's multiple frameworks, can really get you off on the right foot and save you a lot of pain and suffering down the road.
Fantastic. So can you share some examples of how you focus on what type of stakeholders to go for? So obviously you're looking at an ecosystem as a whole, but you can't go after everybody. So where's that focus?
Well, I think when you're starting out, you obviously have a target market in mind. So you already understand what is your addressable market, who are the stakeholders or constituents in that market. You probably have an idea what problem are you trying to solve, right? But it's really, really important not to lead the witness in these early days, right? So, from my vantage point, when I think about customer development, there's sort of three phases to it, right? There is really sort of learn about the pain, so you think there's a pain point in the market you're trying to serve through whatever primary research you've done. And I think good customer development starts by identifying that market and engaging them and really listening to them. Not, it's this whole idea of big ears, small mouth, right? So you have conversations where you're really listening to the pain that those stakeholders are dealing with every single day. So that's sort of phase one. Phase two, you get into probing the pain. And, once you feel like you've got signal on the pain that our audience is experiencing, you can start to probe different solutions to address that pain. And I think the last piece is really focused on getting into the actual, more of the design phase where you're getting feedback on prototypes and things like that. But in terms of figuring out who your stakeholders are within that process, I think it starts with the TAM. You understand the market you're trying to serve. And the way I think about it, if you think of Surehand and what we're doing as an employment platform for the skilled industrial trades, we had multiple stakeholders that we had to engage early days. So one, we focused on a very narrow beachhead market within the skilled industrial trades. We didn't try to boil the ocean. So we focused on industrial inspection as an example. And within that world, there are various stakeholders that are involved in talent and talent sourcing. So in our case, it was we had to engage with service providers and inspection companies, the employers, if you will. We had to engage with the inspectors, the technicians that are actually doing the work, the talent. But we also engaged with the stakeholders that our employer customers were serving as well. So we actually went an extra degree of separation, frankly, and that allowed us to really triangulate on the pain that the industry was feeling or the skilled trades was feeling as it related to really finding best fit talent for the positions and projects they're trying to fill. So again, it's going to vary based on what kind of company do you have, what problem are you trying to solve, is it B2C, B2B, what markets are you serving? It's going to vary, but you have to do your homework to figure out whom you should be speaking to in those early days when you're doing that research.
Great, fantastic, thank you. So a little questions for what you were just talking about.
Sure.
How many stakeholders did you talk to, and how do you know when you get a signal?
Oh, those are great questions. So I think the order of magnitude is hundreds of stakeholders. Again, it's going to depend on the industry, the product, the audience, et cetera. But I think it's not 10, and it's not your friends and family. You really have to go out and engage. And the right way to think about it, and we'll probably talk about this, is you're actually not just getting vital information to, inform your strategy, where you want to go as a business, what you want to build as a product, but you're actually starting early sales conversations with your buyers. They might not be buyers right now because you don't have anything to sell them in the early days, but trust me, those relationships will persist as you go along your journey. So there's no question in my mind that the numbers matter. It is a numbers game. And then in terms of signal, I think that goes into sort of the process, right? So when you start these early customer development efforts, you're doing open-ended interviews with your key stakeholders, whomever they may be. And again, those interviews have sort of a very loose frame around them. You're not pitching them an idea. You're not even talking about your idea. You shouldn't even really be talking. You should be listening. And it is really crafting the questions in those early conversations in a way that centers their answers and their feedback to you in the problem space that you're working within. So you don't want to just go too broad with it, but you certainly shouldn't be presenting them with, hey, here's the thing. What do you think? Would you buy it? Would you use it? That's the wrong way to go about it in my experience. And I've done it that way, both in my entrepreneurial life and my corporate life.
So what's the pitfalls with leading somebody down the path with an idea?
Yeah, you're not so the problem with that is, one, human nature, most people will want to sort of, if you lead the witness too much, they're simply going to just agree with what you're telling them. They're going to be nice. They don't want to upset you. You're a startup person. They want to, and that, again, you're not really going to get underneath what is the real pain? What is the thing that keeps them up at night relative to the problem space that you're working in? And if you already knew all the answers, for sure, you wouldn't need to do the customer development work. And I would bet you that 99% of early stage entrepreneurs and CEOs or founders don't really know that answer. And so the more you can listen and again, record the conversations, take notes, or if you have a co-founder, have your co-founder take notes as you move along. But in those conversations, after you've talked to, let's say, dozens of stakeholders in a given segment, you'll start to see red threads, right? You'll see patterns and trends around that pain start to emerge. And, if you're lucky, they will map to, the idea or the challenge statement you're starting or the problem you're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how do you boil all this information down? So let's say you've talked to 100 people. That's a lot of data. How do you decipher? How do you figure out from each stakeholder what are truly their issues and what are the intersections?
Well, and again, it all depends on, how big is your team early days. Typically, it's a founder or a co-founder. You might have some early stage angel investors or seed folks supporting you. Again, it depends on where you are in your life cycle there. But I would say that there is a synthesis. There you have to synthesize the data that you're starting to see. So as you're starting to evaluate and analyze the notes that you're getting from those early conversations, you can start to group things, feedback thematically. And what'll happen in the beginning, it seems like, so imagine a wall of sticky notes, right? And it's just it's a hot mess. The sticky notes are all over the place. But eventually what happens as you go through this exercise to synthesize that feedback, you can start to see common threads within the red threads that you're hearing. And they start to, I guess a good way to think about it is they start to clot, they start to group. Mm-hmm. And as they form, that will start to move you into the next phase of customer development, where you might say, okay, we've talked to a couple hundred people, our stakeholders, and they've got in the problem space we're working in, they've identified 3 serious areas of pain that all have some common attributes. Then you move into this, next phase where you start to present different, at least in the methodology we use with Surehand, is you move into presenting different scenarios that reflect those pain points, that there are stories that draw out that pain in a way that gets them thinking a little more deeply about that pain point. And those scenarios will start moving you closer to, oh, okay, now we're getting at a solution that we need to build to address those pain points, and start to measure really at that scenario phase, the net promoter score, the NPS score, right? So would you recommend this type of solution to a friend or colleague, scale of 0 to 10, right? And you start to look for, that's where it starts to get much more quantifiable in terms of measuring and evaluating, okay, this is the direction we need to move in. Whereas in the early days, it's much more subjective, and you're just looking for groups of pain and themes that you can use to, inform that scenario process.
Sounds like it's a long process.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, it depends on how many people you have working on it, right? With Surehand, with the luxury, we went through a more formal incubation process. So we had, a decent sized team to do it, but not like dozens of people, right? So 4 or 5 people. If it's just you or you and a co-founder, you'd be surprised how quickly you can connect with people in your market, especially today where, tools like LinkedIn and other professional networking tools like that will let you connect with your stakeholders, get that valuable feedback, especially for B2B plays. B2C may be a little bit harder, but, you got to get creative, get into where those audiences are. If you're selling something that's aimed at college students, get on campus. Hard to do today, arguably, but in this moment, but that's the idea. So again, while it may seem like it takes a fair amount of time, it will save you a tremendous amount of time and money down the line, and frankly, potentially be the difference between success and failure for your business.
So I've heard a lot from founders that getting to those stakeholders and truly understanding what they do is hard, so they tend to give up. or they not give up, but they tend to limit their scope on how many people they talk to. So do you have any creative methods? I mean, I know LinkedIn's one, associations, et cetera. Any other tips and techniques that you can give founders on how to get to those stakeholders?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm a big fan of little yeses. And when you're trying to engage anyone to do anything to help you, particularly in this case where you're asking them to give you their time and insights for free, right? And people's time is valuable.
Right.
And that's a whole nother subject, like whether to pay or not pay folks during this this kind of work. I'm strong proponent of not paying, because you're going to actually get real valuable feedback, not biased in any way. But I do think in terms of little yeses, which is, hey, you want to meet for coffee, right? Like, so, or you're on campus, you find someone that's, walking by you. And again, that can be difficult, but whether you're on LinkedIn or whether you're in person, it's all about simple asks. The tendency is to lay it all out there. Hey, here's what I'm doing. I would love to take 20 minutes of your time and get all your feedback on this great idea I have. And you start explaining the idea, and it's just too much. And I would rather, and what's worked well for us, or for me certainly, is you start with these simple questions. Hey, I noticed you've got and again, I'm a B2B guy, so maybe it's a little bit easier, but you find someone, for example, on LinkedIn, or you're at some conference, or you're in some physical location, and you simply say, hey, I'd love to, given your background, I'd love to connect, like on LinkedIn. That's all you ask for. You say, hey, Joe, hey, Kim, you've got a background in marketing. We're doing some research, or we're thinking about the space. I'd love to connect. So don't try to have the interview all at once. Don't try to get that feedback all at once. Your number one goal is to start that conversation. So, can I get 5 minutes of your time? Can I get 20 minutes of your time? The ask always has to be small and little, and then you build on that over time. And again, it's worked for us in the B2B world. A little bit harder in B2C, I'm sure. But the difference with B2C is, hey, your target markets, there's a lot more of them around you to find as well. So if you're selling something to dog owners, go to a dog park. Talk to dog owners,
So how long did it take you from your initial, how long did it take for your customer development and developing Surehand? How long was that process? And two, by the time you got to actual prototyping, so digesting all the data and getting to prototyping, how long was that?
For us, as I said, we went through a more formal incubation process. So we did have the luxury of perhaps some more resources than, bootstrap startup founders are going to have at their disposal. But that entire process we walked through, so open-ended interviews, scenario-based interviews, and then prototyping. It was a 3-month process, and we engaged well over 250, almost 300 stakeholders during that time. And the really important thing is customer development never stops. So even after we closed our initial funding round, so we became a business, we stood it up. We continue to do customer development work really all the way through the launch of our MVP in February of last year. And we've continued to do it ever since. Some of the open-ended pain point stuff falls off. You might spend more time on the prototyping end of things, depending on what it is you're trying to get feedback on. But that discipline is something that should stay with you for the life of your organization. You hear all the time, as I said, the product people need to get out of the building. So even as you grow a product management team and you're deep into the build, or you have a product and you're enhancing it or extending it, these techniques are invaluable.
Right.
So it doesn't have to take a long time. And again, it's going to vary wildly based on what are you trying to go after
I've
with
seen
the business.
in the past, I've seen a lot of product people where they don't get out of the building and they're building features to go against their competitors. So they're not truly
It's death.
out.
Yeah, again, I think you have to be mindful of your competition. I mean, that's just part of being a good entrepreneur, a good business person. But, especially if you're trying to disrupt something and do something completely different in the markets that you're entering, the old expression, a market without competition it's not a market. So you're going to run into competition, but you need to be mindful of what the competitors are doing. But what really matters is where your customers' pain, or
Right.
where are those pain points, and how can you uniquely address those pain points in a way that no one else can do. And to me, that's the magic of, and frankly, the difference between being successful with your product or business or not.
Fantastic. Well, this is great info. So I'm just kind of curious. I mean, this is, definitely lessons learned and a different approach into building a company. What did you do in the past just so people don't repeat what you've done, and that they shouldn't, what were those mistakes? What were some of those mistakes early on from a customer development standpoint?
I think, well, I can certainly tell you in both my corporate experience and even in the corporate world, and I worked for very large multinational companies like Wolters Kluwer, Thomson Reuters. These are very large companies, but I had the good fortune to work within sort of highly agile innovation teams within those large companies. So in many ways, we were within the large company, but we were effectively internal startups, for lack of a better description. But I think the tendency, certainly in the early, now you can see how white my beard is. I'm going to go back a couple decades, but when you go back into the mid 90s or, Internet 1.0, the early days of all this stuff, which is when I got into this game. One, you didn't have anywhere near the tools or processes. I mean, product management really wasn't even a discipline in the context that it's known today. In the tech world. So it was very early on, but I think generally speaking, and a lot of companies and a lot of founders and CEOs are doing this today still. The tendency is say, I've got this great idea. I think there's a problem out there. I think there's a great business opportunity. I know exactly what we need to do it. Let's build our MVP, take it out to the market, let them crap all over it, and then we'll refine it as we go. That actually takes a lot of time and money to do that as well. And so this process, by really getting underneath the pain points that your target stakeholders have, allows you to save a ton of time and money as you move forward through the life cycle of your business in the early days. And so I would say probably the biggest mistake I've made is probably getting overly excited about my own idea, knowing that it would absolutely solve my customers' pain points. And by the way, I had a startup in Hollywood not too long ago. We started as a B2C play. We pivoted. I'll spare you the details, but it was essentially a platform to better allow film and television industry to manage their projects, data, content, all this stuff. And man, we thought it was the best idea ever because the industry was still sending around screenplays in print. PDF files was insecure, not efficient, blah, 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 blah. So we thought, oh my God, this is a no-brainer. Took meetings, senior level meetings at studios, management companies, agencies, production companies. Everybody's head nodding, right? Yeah, this is a great idea. We love this, right? So, okay. And we bootstrapped this business, so that was especially painful. But at the end, when we finally launched and we went back to those same people that were so excited, right? But again, we had led the witness. We put this idea in front of them. In fact, we had a working MVP. It wasn't terribly good because we went, move fast and break stuff, right? Isn't that the whole mentality? And when it came time for them to actually buy, they weren't interested because the pain wasn't acute enough. So we basically took our perception of the pain without talking to anybody in a meaningful or deep way, or structured way, frankly. We led the witness. We got all excited because we thought we were hearing yeses. But all we were hearing was, hey, that's a good idea, but I don't need it because the pain's just not great enough. And that's just one example. And again, I think those are great learning experiences for any aspiring founder and CEO. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to get it wrong. But I think, our topic today, or your topic we're talking about, is so important because it really helps you have the discipline and take the time to deeply understand the customer's journey. What are their pain points? And once you've homed in on that pain, now you have something that they're willing to buy, particularly if they're telling you that they would recommend it to a friend or colleague at the top of the NPS scale.
So you had mentioned early on, I'm kind of going back to the beginning because it's,
Sure.
All this is just great information and more questions come to my head. about truly, the open-ended interviews. Explain what an open-ended interview is, because I think people have a tendency to say, oh, I did interview people, but what does an open-ended interview look like? So think back and, when you start Surehand.
And so it starts with, you have to have this sort of challenge statement in mind. You have to understand internally what is the problem you're trying to solve. You have to have that notion. It's not starting with a complete blank slate where you just say, hey, tell me what keeps you up at night with no context whatsoever.
Right.
So in our case, it was sort of where, literally the interview script was designed to get them talking, but talking in the context of talent and labor. Like, we weren't talking about being a hiring platform at that point. We had done initial research that indicated that there was significant friction, labor shortages in the skilled trades, under and unemployment in the skilled trades. The process was broken. We had enough of a signal to say, hey, we want to spend some time digging a little bit deeper. So I think you are setting a frame in those early conversations. You're developing an interview script. It's not terribly long, because you really only want to take about 20 minutes of the person's time. But you're creating questions that are thoughtful questions in your problem space that are not simple yes/no questions. They're designed specifically to elicit a long response. You get them thinking. And look, I love to talk. I love to pitch, all that stuff.
You?
So the hardest thing, yes, yeah, I know you know that. So the hardest thing for me when I started doing this, using this kind of methodology, was to sit back and really listen. Like, to the point where it's almost like I needed a pin in my shoe. And every time I wanted to talk, I'll probably do that next time. I'll just step on the pin, so it just reminds me to be quiet. But the key is to really get them talking, keep them talking. You're recording that. You're taking notes, obviously, with their permission. And that's where the gold is because then they get really comfortable. They start thinking about their pain and again, in a B2B case, their work life. And that's where you really start getting at things that are really important to people. And those are the things that they're going to be willing to spend some money on. Because at the end of the day, if they won't buy it, it doesn't matter for most initiatives like this, right?
Right.
So it is important to set that context, but the questions are designed to elicit conversation, not yes, no, yes, no. Those answers won't help you at all.
Got it. Well, this is fantastic feedback. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you think that potential founders and founders should know?
Yeah, I think the thing I'd like to close with, at least from my vantage point, as I said at the top, this is actually the beginning of your sales cycle for your business. So all the stakeholders that you're engaging with, these are the folks, especially the ones who get excited, which is another indicator of are you on to something? Because if they're willing to keep talking with you and working with you. So I talk to you and I have a great open-ended interview. And my closing question will be like, hey, Kim, that was great. It was exactly the kind of feedback I was looking for. Would you mind if I contacted you again as we move along our journey? And then you can tell by the time you've moved them through open-ended interviews, scenario-based interviews, giving feedback on early prototypes, then you move into the pilot, beta ask. Would you be willing to be a pilot customer? And because they've already engaged and spent that time with you, and they've been there from the beginning or from the early days, it just removes the whole conversation. Is not about selling. They've already bought in their own minds at that point. And so that's something that worked very well for us in terms of lining up our early pilot customers and end users. And it's something, again, that we continue to do today. We're looking at expanding beyond our initial beachhead market into other skilled trades like welding and some of the construction trades. So we've been working on customer development efforts ahead of that expansion for the last quarter and a half. So again, this is the time that you need to take can be, weeks, month and a half on some of these things. But it's incredibly valuable. And then the payoff is on the back end because you've built something that really solves the pain. your customers are willing to pay for, and you've done it in a way where you haven't spent a ton of money. Prototypes
Right.
are cheap. Software is expensive. Code is
Right.
expensive. Prototypes are cheap.
So what would you say, percentage-wise, of the people that you actually interviewed for the open-ended interviews that you continued and talked to them for your prototype? Do you have any guesstimates on that?
Oh yeah, I think on the employer side, well, really on both sides, to be honest
Mm-hmm.
with you, I would say on the employer side, within the segment that was identified as our key buyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we talked to some of their customers just to
Right.
triangulate and strengthen the signal. I would say 60%.
Wow.
I mean, a
That's a lot.
significant number of those early conversations turned into ongoing sales conversations, and ultimately, whether or not we closed all of them, because it's not, those relationships were not just about directly selling, but it was also about helping us then get into the industries we were serving more deeply. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a combination of, yeah, ultimately a good number of them became customers of ours. On the worker front, I would say the number was closer to 80-90% of the workers we engaged ended up,
That's
creating
unreal.
worker profiles on Surehand. Well, I mean, it's free for workers,
Yeah.
right? And it's, it's a service that helps them have better job opportunities come to them in a much more efficient way
Mm-hmm.
than ever before. And so the sell to a worker is easier just because it's free and we're giving them a lot of value for nothing. But still, you're right. I think, in that 90 percentile range, we had very few people, if I think back through our early customer development efforts, didn't like what we're doing, gave us low net promoter scores on either side of our talent ecosystem. So we were fortunate that we found very strong signal, absolutely validated what we were doing. But again, whether you're selling those early relationships and turning them into customers or end users, it's equally important to have those relationships to connect you with other people who might become customers or
Mm-hmm.
might help you increase brand awareness. You're building your ambassadors, your champions, and you're doing it from day one using a methodology like this.
Have you ever worked in a more mature marketplace where people are very entrenched into the solutions that they're using and don't want to budge, and it might not be a solution that's up to the 20th century? And I guess what comes to my mind is something like healthcare, where they move incredibly slow. There's definitely entrenched players in there. They might not be good, but that's kind of the way that people normally do it. Have you ever worked in an industry like that, or?
For sure. I mean, I think, and even in our current state with Surehand, I mean, to be honest with you, while a lot of the skilled trade jobs that we serve on the worker side are working for companies that deploy incredible technology. You think about oil and gas, you think about construction,
Right,
you think
right.
about aerospace and aviation. These
Mm-hmm.
guys can drill a mile and a half below the ocean floor, find a pocket of oil, bring it up, and do all this stuff. But the back office is incredibly behind in terms of technology and solutions. They are actually using a lot of outdated processes and tools, starting to change, but it's definitely something that we've run into even in our early days. And the way I think about customer development and how that helped us with Surehand is it's a process. Again, these are little yeses.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't being sold in those early days. They're trying to make their industries, their lives, their professional lives better. So to me, I think of it like it's tenderizing the meat, right? So you're working with them early on. You just kind of, and then by the time you have your thing, whatever that thing is, and it solves the pain that it's going to solve because you did all this hard work up front, it just makes everything easier. It's still a lot of hard work. I mean,
Right,
entrepreneurship, startup life, as you know, it's not for everybody.
right.
But I wouldn't be doing anything else with my time right now or ever, to be honest, for the rest of my career. So anyway, I hope those are helpful thoughts. I mean, the one other thing I would add is there's some really good frameworks out there. For those that are tuning in or listening to this, the methodology that we use with
Mm-hmm.
Surehand, and I continue to use to this day, was the lean customer development methodology. Cindy Alvarez has a great book out. You can find it on Amazon. So if you're a startup and a CEO and you want to kind of dig deeper into this and understand the process, that's a really good place to start.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all this feedback. This is really valuable for this founder community. And thank you again. And I look forward to chatting with you on another episode.
I like it. Best of luck to you.
Thanks.
All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.